Do 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 do. Extras.
Which Rygax was the real one? The thing about the two Rygaxes, some of you guys seem to like the plural Ry guys, is that I went in knowing which Rygax was real. But I had no plan, no correct answer for the puzzle of how to determine which one was real. Both had his buffs and his resistance to divinations, both had his memories, or close enough, though I left myself a little fuzziness there. Both of their stories of what happened when they entered the planeshift portal within Albtraum's realm were plausible, but not great. Both left room for doubt. So instead of being a puzzle with a right answer, I let them think and debate and stress over it, and my job was to figure out when they had come up with a reasonable solution where I could just let it work. So they try handing each Rygax a holy weapon, no reaction. But when they decided to spend the infusion and to try again with unholy, I felt like by that time they had spent the effort, argued, stressed, and even spent some resources trying to solve this problem. I felt like they had earned their breakthrough, so I gave them a reaction from wrong Rygax. And even then, it turned out pretty great, because they had this powerful signal like, whoa, we've got a sign, something that's different, and it seems like this one's not right. And yet they all know that Rygax serves a demigod of death, a psychopomp, though I irrationally dislike that word. In English it sounds really stupid and utterly unrelated to what it means. But anyway, he serves a being whose very purpose is neutrality. Meaning, for all that he's a legendary hero, and sure seems like a capital G good guy to them, it would make total sense if he was, in fact, neutral aligned. In which case he could hold both the holy and unholy weapons without being harmed. Which means they really just created the new question, is the real Rygax good? Or is he neutral and the Albtraum made the fake good to trick them? They bet on good Rygax. Also, just as a side note, while originally Angel wanted to put one of those buffs on either side of her spike chain, which you can do since it's considered a double weapon, although I went with that in a video because it's cool and because it seems simpler, in practice they reconsidered and put Unholy on Angel's dagger instead, just out of a paranoid worry that something bad might happen if you had Holy and Unholy on the same physical item, even though, as I said, the rules consider a double weapon two separate weapons for enchantments. Anyway, this is the episode where their fatal decision was put to the test and good Rygax healed like 300 damage. Forget Betrayal. If he had just stood still and done nothing, I'm not sure whether they could have beaten Zukuno or not, but if they survived that, I would definitely have had to skip the Vazilai fight just out of fairness. As a GM, it's always good to have options which let you dynamically add or reduce difficulty depending on what your party seems able to handle, to aim for that ideal barely win result, or failing that, the also epic barely lose. Now, that was skipping to the conclusion though. They schemed and brainstormed and argued for quite a while before finding an answer which I allowed to work. Before testing the aligned weapons, the main debate was over two interrelated things. Trying to read their minds with Angel's Detect Thoughts spell, or use various other divinations. This plan has the flaw that Detect Thoughts allows a will save, and Rygax almost certainly has a good one, and of course, they understand that Rygax has even more protections against divination than only the caster level 20 misdirection that he and the others all got from the future seed. Also, they quickly talked themselves into assuming that the copy could have all identical memories to the real one, without really even putting that to the test. Partly because they hadn't known Rygax that long, so they had no way to confirm anything he remembered from before they met him anyway. And the other was threatening Rygax to choose not to resist Detect Thoughts or other divinations, or to voluntarily lower his magical protections. This plan has the flaw that they don't understand enough about what all Rygax has concealing him from all those Vampire Kings and their minions, and it's quite plausible that he just can't turn them off whenever he wants. But in any case, once I allowed the holy-unholy test to give them a hint, they moved to action quite quickly with the results we all saw in episode 61. Which Zukuno was the real one. Of course, as soon as they started fighting, we had 5 different Zukunos. Bearing in mind that this version of multiform doesn't appear to be balanced or to reflect how real multiform works, while simultaneously implying that multiform is a real technique used by some Deathfins, the first question is, was there a real or central Zukuno? Yes. Okay, but which one was the real one? Well, when I first split them off, I actually forgot to pick the real one. Oops. But I realized my mistake before the end of the first round, around when I split off their initiative groups, so I designated the real Zukuno at that time, after which I did keep track. I have a note that claims I randomized it. I'm not 100% on that, though it sounds like a good thing to have done. However, I did not keep track all that well in reconstructing it for the video. In hindsight, I think in the episode I might have merged the remaining multiforms into the wrong body, and I know he ended up with 6 images, which I think means his actual body had those left, but it's also possible that I just fudged it to give him the best image count of the lot when they merged. Oh, and just so you know, according to my notes, there should actually have been one more multiform body, but when I was laying out the battle, I thought it made the map too cluttered. Beware the dungeon master who believes in you. The Albtraum is an even bigger dick? You may agree with Little One that this particular trickster demigod is a less than trustworthy or even antagonistic character, even though they basically broke their own rules to give these poor fools a chance. How generous is that? However, there's at least one way Al could have been much more horrible to them, but they managed to avoid it. When the Albtraum asked them which opponent they would rather fight, the monitor who killed Angel's master, or the one who killed Little One's mother. Now, sometime before this, I had sent each of those players the story, the same stories upon which I based those respective Legends videos. So, without them realizing it at the time, I had prepped them for this. What they didn't know, and what I had not prepared, was Deathfin Vazilai's stats. He was only about half done, meaning that if they picked Zukuno, great, I would send out Zukuno. But if they had preferred to fight Vazilai, Al would have taken that under advisement and sent out Zukuno, which would probably have made them very salty even if, as shown in the video, they weren't too terribly invested in their choice. I asked you who you would prefer to fight, and now I know. I don't know why you would assume you would get what you want. Of course, fighting Zukuno took a long time, hours of gameplay, and when we called it a night, it was around when Black went down and Draven cast Blade Barrier, so I had another week on my breaks and after work to sort out Vazilai's build, in case our heroes were still in fighting shape after defeating our Blood Mountain Deathfin, which at that point seemed likely, though casualties were definitely still a possibility. I've mentioned before that even when I have maps, and I really didn't for this battle, I virtually never have useful visual information for the round-by-round state of the map during battles, which leaves me just doing the best I can to reverse engineer everyone's positions from the audio alone. You can tell I had a hard time in this video because I made little to no efforts to stick to a grid, even a hidden one, and made the bad guy icons large while fighting, both to help them stand out from the heroes, but also to increase the benefit of the doubt on their exact positions, so people would complain less about attacks of opportunity, being close enough to full attack, etc. Even then, I do some dodgy nudging of tokens between rounds to try to make the map fit the actions which I know to have happened. Honestly, I couldn't find anything to verify the size of the octagon. Player tokens are normally the size of a D&D standard 5-foot square, and based on that, I think the octagon should have been slightly larger, though since literally everyone except Vazilai was hasted, there are only a few times it really mattered. For example, on Vazilai's first turn, I know he wasn't able to get within his 50-foot reach of Draven without spending a teleport, which, even if he barely needed it, suggests that the heroes, and the Blade Barrier, were much farther away from the dais than it looks like in the episode. More importantly, though, the battle crossed the boundary between sessions, between recordings, and the second night I apparently didn't start recording right away, leaving at least half a round unaccounted for. It looks like we ended right after Zukuno took down Black with a full attack, so after Multiform ended. But I didn't know who healed Black, allowing him to then cast heal on himself, or the exact circumstances in which Draven cast the Blade Barrier. And the most annoying problem, I have no idea how Angel got back up, because she was unconscious when we left off. I had evidence that Rygax probably healed Mora, who then cast Cure Light Wounds on herself, but at this point the most likely options were A. I somehow forgot that Rygax only gets one secondary target for Eldritch Chain and let him heal 3 people instead of 2. B. Angel forgot to record the last hit that dropped her on her character sheet, and nobody remembered that she was down when we picked up again. Draven couldn't have dropped a heal, because he had to have cast Blade Barrier that turn. And Black couldn't have because he was unconscious, and then he had to cast capital H heal on himself. But I knew Krillodin had lost his standard action to the Burning Blood spell again, so I ended up with the questionable, he uses his move action to healing potion her, just so the battle would make sense in the video. I'm pretty sure we actually just forgot that Angel was down though, and I know she was conscious at this point because the next thing she did was use her healing belt to raise her hit points out of the danger zone. Reconstructing battles from just audio is hard. When people watch the videos and tell me, "You're such an amazing GM," I'm like, no, not really. Partly that's because I don't take compliments well, responding to excessive or unearned ones with more realistic assessments or with self-deprecation, which is a poor defense mechanism because people tend to either counter with more compliments or think I'm fishing for compliments. There's no winning, really. But anyway, in my opinion, I'm a great storyteller and world builder, but not that great at emotional role-playing, improv, other than smartass comments and wordplay, and running the table. So between that and mediocre to poor record-keeping between sessions by myself and some players, sessions which were sometimes a month or more apart, a complex 2-game session battle like this ended up full of errors. So many I need to just run through them in point form. First off, obvious from the video, pretty sure I banned Zealot Pact after the first monitor, but so much real-life time had passed, and in well over half of those weeks we hadn't been able to play, that Black and even I didn't really remember that until it came up again, and I was like, I guess I didn't ban that? Though I will tell you, as I reconstructed the battle, it made shockingly little difference. Those huge damage numbers he was hitting, Zukuno's multiforms only had 39 hit points, so his crits would have killed them anyway, and he didn't get that many other hits. Another insane mistake, which by the numbers didn't affect the battle as much as you would think. For some stupid reason, I misread, or more importantly, miswrote in my notes, that Zukuno's 50% mischance from being a high-level Swiftblade applied to all attacks and spells, where it's actually all targeted attacks and spells. In other words, I was applying it to area attacks when in fact they should have hit him just fine. So half of Draven's castings from his Wand of Earthreaver, probably closer to 3/4 just due to bad die rolls, did no damage. Though because that spell's save is separate from the damage, I was rolling it anyway just for the hell of it, which really did result in Zukuno falling down a statistically unlikely number of times. Now, Draven did keep using the spell, since it was still the best way to deal damage, and the amounts of damage I showed in the episode, about what it would have done without my accidental cheating mischance, didn't seem to change the results of the battle. However, that is ignoring the fact that without the mischance, Draven would undoubtedly have used it even more and kept pounding the same body, so he surely would have blown up another of the multiform bodies. Unless he happened to be targeting the main one, in which case perhaps the damage would cause him to die a round sooner. So that's my bad. Halfway through this fight, Little One realized that, due to the way he'd recorded it on his character sheet, he had been adding the +2 initiative enchantment from Marp's sword for all this time, when he was actually using his Extendo Spear, or now the Black Hammer. That's okay, he apparently had the blurring property on his armor, the cheap version usable like 3 times a day for 20% mischance on attacks against him. It certainly never stopped an attack here, which is totally possible, but I suspect that I was forgetting to roll it most of the time, and there's no way I would have remembered he was blurred in the second session. When Zukuno head-stomped Black, I was mixing up how 2 powers of the elusive target tactical feat work. To get the free trip attack, he would actually have had to move away from his dodge target, provoking an attack of opportunity, and have had that attack of opportunity miss him. Then again, if I was using it properly, he would have still redirected Black's first attack into the fist statue. The head stomp was super cool though, representing Black missing, Vaz succeeding on his trip attack, then getting a free attack from improved trip to deal the damage. So let's just blame that one on the Albtraum. creative liberties. Also, being tripped on the first swing of his full attack should not have stopped him from making the remaining attacks, though they'd have been at -4 from being prone. So that part would have been the same if Vazilai had correctly just portaled his first swing into the fist. I think his player just assumed trip would stop the full attack and I just didn't notice. I also messed up, in a sense, by taking Vazilai out of fighting defensively at the start. I really wanted to make sure that initial cool-looking attack hit Draven, and it turns out it would have missed otherwise due to Little One's shield block maneuver. But he has to be fighting defensively to use the Monitor fighting style, which, instead of deflecting a single arrow, gives him an opposed roll to deflect each projectile, which should have stopped a bunch of Krill's arrows and almost certainly would have kept him alive for one more round. And with one more turn, could he have dropped more of them, or set up more of his crazy dodge feat bullshit? Who knows, but every person who went down would have increased his chance of surviving yet another round, as long as he positioned himself to avoid being full attacked again. By the way, Vazilai's crazy hitting you from all directions maneuver, it's actually just Rabid Bear Strike, a level 6 Tiger Claw maneuver. You get -4 AC till your next turn, make one attack with +4 to hit, and plus 10d6 damage. Vazilai's method, however, looks so much cooler. Why not 20 challenges? Why does Al let them off? Obviously, the Albtraum isn't going to give the PCs 15 more challenges, because they had been sidetracked and trapped in a Shadowfell for like 2 years of real time, half of which was a sidetrack of a sidetrack in a twisted alternate reality where the only thing that matters is surviving in angry demigod sadistic games. So the real question is, in character, why doesn't Al just say, "Oops, I'm sorry. According to Rule 1B, you have 15 more challenges to go. And here, I'm giving a key to Deathfin Vazilai here, so consider him challenge number 6. The Albtraum is obviously overconfident, leading to their downfall, but to try to put divine rules and motivations beyond your comprehension into terms within our feeble mortal comprehension, they are trying to maximize their karma gain from winning, rather than maximizing their chance of winning. In other words, they have alternate metrics for success, and gain the most from inflicting mental suffering and stress, and by cutting things close, assuming they still win, which this time they did not. Every moment that beings are in the realm of the Albtraum, the demigod seeks to make them feel small, weak, inferior to those who came before them, and most of all, to make them feel hopeless. But if you want to make them really suffer, feel truly hopeless, you give them hope, then yank it away. I'm sure you can all pick out countless examples through the challenges of situations designed to increase stress, confusion, and fear, from splitting the party in the first challenge to forcing those troubling visions upon them, and even forcing them to stress over whether or not to risk sharing what they had seen. So the Albtraum's in-universe incentives just happen to line up with my objectives as a GM. Not always. I'm by no means always trying to make it good chance you'll die hard. But during this section, if I left in 40 minutes of condensed battle, what did I leave out? Monitor recovery method. Tome of Battle classes each have a method for recovering maneuvers in combat. For example, a Warblade, like Little One, has the best method. All he has to do is not use any maneuvers for a round, including immediate actions before his turn. Then either make one or more normal attacks, or spend a standard action if there are no good targets around, to recover all of his expended maneuvers. My custom Monitor Prestige class has 2 methods. One is to spend a full round action to recover all their maneuvers. That's pretty weak, nobody has time for that in a serious fight, but obviously they do it as soon as they are out of combat. Their second, more interesting recovery method is, once per round, when the Monitor drops a target, they can recover a single maneuver as a free action, as long as the target dropped has hit dice greater than or equal to the Monitor's initiator level, or the Monitor has dropped a number of weaker foes equal to or greater than the Monitor's initiator level, and the maneuver recovered is one they have not used since the beginning of their last turn. Now, that's what's written on the Tumblr post. I think in practice I was using half the Monitor's initiator level as the benchmark, because the point was just that they've taken down a meaningful enemy, or a ton of peons. which means Zukuno and Vazilai qualified for this quite a lot, as they were playing whack-a-mole against the party's significant healing efforts. But every time it came up, I'd start describing it, then it would trail off into, except he can't, because the only maneuvers he has used were too recent. That clause is important, because otherwise you could have a situation where a monitor with, say, a level 9 strike maneuver, who uses it to wall up a PC, drop them, then recover that same maneuver. Or maybe they'd have 2 huge maneuvers and just alternate between them every round, without even taking every 3rd or 4th round off to full attack like Little One. But in this case, Zukuno couldn't use maneuvers at all in multiform, so by the time that ran out, he'd take out Black with Burning Blade, then have nothing to recover because his only expended maneuver was that Burning Blade. Similarly, Vazilai was dropping people like dominoes, 1 hit, 1 kill until Mora. But there were so few actual turns involved that everything he had used was still within the window. Broken statues. 2 big statues had formed a dispelling arch at the entrance to the octagon, which weren't at all presenting a temptation for someone to smash them shortly after a challenge which not only allowed but required the heroes to smash a number of similar statues. Anyhow, somehow one of them ended up smashed in a previous episode. Now, for time reasons, I cut some description relating to the statues, and coincidentally, the battle map ended up basically never showing them at the very bottom, because I wanted to keep the important parts as large as possible, and the octagon being effectively a square room with corners cut off on a rectangular video, I basically just didn't show them. But once everybody was in the room, as soon as the Albtraum appeared to start monologuing, a wall of black lightning sprung from the intact statue across the entrance, trapping the heroes in the room. Now, I don't think they were particularly inclined to leave, they were busy trying to win, but this did stop them from considering some kind of choke point tactics, hit and run, etc. And frankly, they wisely kept their distance from the black lightning, just in case. Which is another reason there was no real incentive to pan the map further down in the video. Then, at the end, when Vazilai went down and pillars of flame sprung up from the corners of the octagon, the still standing statue toppled over, and lightning arced out from it to the nearest PC. Now, nobody was actually particularly close, making this kind of questionable. It happened anyway, because Albtraum. But I told the closest PC, in this case Black, to roll a d20, and they'd only be affected if they rolled a 1. He did not, so nothing happened, though had he rolled a 1, I would have made him save versus the spell Destruction, the same one that hit them when they messed with the pedestal in the Hex challenge. Since it was Black, he would only have failed that save on another 1, so it was really a 1 in 400 chance to kill him, but Black's player loves RNG, so oddly, I don't think he would have been quite as disturbed by that final stroke of Al's malice as other people might have. Albtraum adjusts the keyholes for symmetry. Okay, this one kind of kills me because it would have been a great sight gag and trivially easy to animate, but I just couldn't fit it in due to pacing. When the Albtraum slowed down time for that last rules lawyer moment, once Little One chose a single final challenge, Al created a second keyhole beside the first. But the first keyhole was, of course, centered beneath the throne, meaning the second one was stuck off to the side, throwing off the symmetry. The plan was, a little while after combat started again, to focus on Al for a moment, then pan down a bit to see the 2 keyholes, one centered, one not, then have Al make a little tapping motion with one hand, causing the keyholes to slide over such that the pair would be centered. That's it, just a little moment of perfectionism, as though using their godly powers to edit a tweet. I really wanted it, and I believe in the last shots those keyholes are in fact centered because this was the plan. But when I tried to figure out where to insert that moment, I couldn't find any place where it didn't feel to me like it was breaking the flow of the narration and or animation, and it wasn't helping with the music either. In order for it to work as a sight gag, it really needed a little time to sit, and it turns out there was a lot less time after the time slow than I felt like there was, in which things are happening too fast with a lot of tension which I didn't want to break by stopping dead for like 5 to 10 seconds. So with heavy heart, I ended up leaving it out. Seriously though, imagine Q from Star Trek sitting on the throne of skulls. He glances down, frowns slightly, furrowing his brow, pointedly looks off to the side, toward the action, but raises one hand slightly and surreptitiously taps the air twice with 2 fingers, altering the physical reality of the keyholes at the bottom of the screen. After lowering his hand again, he adjusts his gaze slightly, still pointedly not looking down at his handiwork, but now with the slightest hint of a grin, satisfied. Vazilai's teleport kick. Okay, this one arguably provides some consistency of fighting style within what little we have seen of Deathfin Vazilai between this video and Legends the Bronze Death. But mostly it was just because the original description, which was awesome, would have required me to either animate something very challenging for me, or to show it from a different angle, which was definitely within my capabilities, but drawing everything from a totally different angle would have ended up taking up a lot of time anyway. Thing is, the round where Vazilai was knocking down the worn-out party members like dominoes. Teleport elbows Krillin, then Rygax, knocking them each down. My original description of his last attack was, as Rygax crumbles to the ground, Vazilai spins into a roundhouse kick, but his leg disappears before passing over him, appearing next to Mora's head. His foot strikes her in the head from out of nowhere, before reappearing at the end of his leg as he completes the rotation and lands. I would have loved to show that, doing a full roundhouse kick, preferably slowed down so you could see the end of his leg disappear into the portal kick, still in that arc of motion just displaced, then reappear as he lands. But the only way I could show that in a reasonable amount of work would be from a top view, which would suddenly not be a reasonable amount of work because I would have had to draw and animated the top view of Mora getting kicked in the face and of Vazilai spinning around. It just made so much more sense to retool his axe kick from the Bronze Death video, especially since that helped me to expand out and emphasize that moment of shocking defiance, which felt pretty cool in the video. The round kick would never have looked particularly like it was going for Rygax. Of course, then, I spent so much time adding extra lightning effects that I'm not sure I saved that much effort anyway, but whatever. Mora died? Yeah, for, 20 minutes, we thought Mora had actually died. Anyway, Mora, she took the 26 damage, like the half, right? Half? No, then she's dead. She's in the negative. She's not actually dead, is she? She can only survive minus 15. But she was at 15, right? No, she only had 10 HP. But she got healed, though, by Rygax? No, she's right. She's dead. Who's dead? Mora's dead. No! She's arguably one of the most useful members of the entire party. Not out-and-out powerful, but... Well, I didn't know she was so... I would have tossed my last closed wounds when she went down. She only got healed 15 or something. Well, that sucks. Oh well. Mora, no! And the Deathfin recovers a maneuver, because dropping a foe is one of the monitor recovery methods. I saved her life before. You liked Mora. It's like 75% of a PC. It really is, because if Angel had died, Mora was the backup character. But by the next round, Angel had recalculated and realized she had actually not counted one of the heals Mora had received, and with that she was still unconscious but above the death threshold. We mostly just took her word for it because we weren't all tracking her numbers, but I am happy to announce that in reconstructing the battle and trying to nail down the numbers for all those stupid hit point bars, I can confirm Angel was right the second time. Mora really did survive. Hooray! How could Vazilai possibly go against the wishes of the Albtraum? We know that Al appears able to craft everything from fireball-resistant ultra-dense trees to a thicket of carved statues to a trench full of lava. But here we get into the question of what are the enemies encountered within the realm of the Albtraum? The zombies are just zombies. It's actually unclear if Al was animating the bizarre corpses found throughout the upper layers of ground in the Shadowfell, or creating them from whole cloth. They were being generated using power from the destiny value of the head of the horseman, but the Albtraum could do it any number of other ways. They might as well be more of those unnatural trees. The demons were real demons transferred in from the Hells. Losing them is mildly annoying, because Al ends up owing them a tiny bit for the trouble. It still counts as though they died in the material world, meaning they can't return for a period. But in this setting, it's so hard for demons and devils to sneak in, they probably weren't getting back anyway. Not a big deal. The tentacle casters? Those were real. Swayne still had them hunting the party, and they had bunched up around the dark place, so Al just invited them in. The frost sharks summoned elementals. The Ladon? Well, that was just a waste on Cornello's part. The Headless Horseman? 100% authentic. And we know how they got here. But then we get to the real questions. What were Shadow Kajor, fake Rygax, and the Nightmare duplicate monitors? Can Al just poof into existence creatures with that much physical and magical power and skill, with that much personality, that much life? Kajor had them mostly convinced that he was real, and weakened Rygax really had them agonizing, even though they had two of the same guy, so one of them had to be fake. They all had so much soul. That's right, souls. If Al wants to make a golem or a beast or an excremental, that would be a poop elemental, they can just do so. No problem. And that can include very powerful, non-sentient or minimally intelligent creatures. But to create a being with a convincing personality and emotions, or being capable of fighting with sophisticated abilities and strategy, Al needs more than just the raw materials of their realm. They need a soul. Fortunately, the Outtro has plenty of souls, and access to countless more, by trading with their master, Asmodeus, the Lord of Hell and Nightmares. So, when a challenge calls for a convincing fake or a skilled opponent, or both, the first step is to select, or acquire, the soul of a past warrior who is as similar as possible in temperament, skills, mindset, a kindred soul. For Kajor, not just an orc, but an orc leader, which conveniently correlates quite well with battle abilities. And for the monitors, the Hells have an excellent selection of past monitors. Asmodeus is unlikely to part with a legend like Shuazul, but there are still excellent candidates from every monastery, including Shadowfinns. Now this doesn't work like Shang Tsung. Even with Al's power, they can't simply incarnate an individual from their soul. It's unclear how much of the knowledge, skills, and power they had in life is preserved in the Hells, but when they're pulled back out, there's little if any of that. Rather, the soul, as used by the Albtraum, is largely stripped down to its barest essence. But what they do have is affinity. With the right soul, Al can build a body, copying the physique, the memories, and, as closely as they can manage, the abilities of a living being. However Al gets that information, the closer they can make that body and mind to the real thing, and the more compatible a soul they can find, the better the duplicate should perform. And sometimes Al messes up. Hard to tell how often, because when a copy comes out badly, it never sees the light of day. Scrap it. Start all over. Decide whether to try again with the same soul, or to send it back to hell. But Vazilai's monologue in the episode was exactly correct. Just the old warrior's body and even his memories were not enough. The Albtraum had to find a soul, almost certainly a Kuo-toa monitor, and probably even one from Blood Mountain, who, in their life, had been just as devoted and determined, just as proud and independent, just as sarcastic and strategic as the real Deathfin Vazilai. And the demigod had to allow that soul a certain degree of free will, because if constrained, he wouldn't be able to emulate the monitor that Al needed. The power required to defeat our heroes at anything less than the top of their game, because if their best performance, and only their best, would be enough to triumph, then by definition the challenge must be fair. But that was the contradiction, because that kind of free will didn't work when constrained. Al called Vazilai a puppet because Al wanted a puppet, wanted him to believe he was a puppet. But in order to preserve their power, the two copies were programmed to only the minimum extent to accept the Albtraum's authority as though he were their Godfin, or the Diluvian Emperor himself. But for all the information Al seems able to access, things he is able to know in a way similar to a Fae knowing that you'll slip up and break your oath 5 years in the future, they nevertheless didn't really understand how monitors, especially one like Vazilai, or a kindred soul to him, love to exert their agency within the constraints of their duty by following their mission to the letter, twisting its intention, or by doing almost the opposite, using as broad or as narrow an interpretation of their mission as they needed to do whatever they really wanted, such as interpreting kill them all, to focus on defeating all the threats first before wasting time finishing one individual. And it turned out that the Albtraum making themselves the authority in fake Vazilai's mind did not mean they had earned the Deathfin's respect, any more than some do-nothing emperor chosen by unaccountable priests sitting in a grandiose palace. Did they loot the monitors? Did they even have loot? When Zukuno dropped, they were immediately presented with the threat of Vazilai. When Vazilai dropped, the whole place got a scary, collapsing temple sort of vibe. Each time, the only thing they looted was the key they needed for the challenge. Now, did the monitors have equipment? Yes. However, instead of spending the time to fully itemize them, the Albtraum just made their clothing serve as generic but powerful nightmare gear. Basically, it gave them +2 to everything. That is to say, +2 to each ability score, +2 to hit, to damage, to armor class, saving throws, even +2 to the DCs of their spells and abilities. That's fairly powerful, but very generalized. Whereas you'd assume that real, built-like-a-player character boss NPCs like this should have much more customized gear, probably bigger bonuses to the stats they care about most, probably a lot more armor class, and a couple strong special abilities, etc. Al did bother to include one other item, though. I mentioned Vazilai's amulet when he unfroze to grab the key, opening his jacket and teleporting it onto the chain. Al did take the time to give him a version of a magic amulet that he wears, because it grants him immunity to the spell Dimensional Anchor, which would otherwise really ruin his day. The party were correct not to waste time looting, though. That stuff would all have disappeared as they left Al's realm, when they passed through the portal to the Fadelands. In a YouTube comment, Golork asked, "So, what would happen if the Albtraum invited in somebody so effective and so crazy, or who loved to be challenged so much that they won, escaped, then later came back for more? How would Al react? Would the demigod keep inviting a person in if that person just kept winning every time?" It's hard to say, because it's a hard situation to envision. After all, defeating the Albtraum isn't about raw power. Even another demigod would most likely not be able to overpower Albtraum's games, not on their home turf. Al can easily create environments and opponents to overpower the brute force of any lesser being, meaning it really comes down to a combination of performing at one's personal best, which even somebody much less powerful than RPCs could potentially do, and the mental strength to weather all the psychological warfare, to solve the puzzles, and generally outthink the Albtraum. Because, let's face it, though Al's intelligence stat is way above 20, the number clearly isn't everything. Say we take an alternate universe Swayne, who, after 1,000 years of being an overpowered yet utterly bored vampire king, decides that the Albtraum is the perfect solution to his monotony, challenges the demigod, and wins. Again, despite Swayne's massive stats and many abilities, if Al decides to create a barrier the vampire king can't bypass, Swayne will not be able to break through. They'd probably start a little easy and work their way up, both to provide some glimmer of hope while refining Albtraum's measure of the king's capabilities, always aiming to just barely defeat him. But if Swayne outsmarts and outworks him, shows true heart or humility or whatever else Al thinks would be hardest for him to do, and he wins all 20 challenges, then comes back the next year, of course Al would invite him in. The opportunity to overturn the previous defeat would just be too enticing. However, if Swayne beat them again, and a third time, and returned yet again like, "Come on, oh mighty Albtraum, entertain me." At some point, probably the third or fourth time, we would run into a fork in the road. A real challenge for the Albtraum themselves. The repeated losses would not suit them at all, either in practical terms, whatever that means, karma, etc., or psychologically. And so I think there are two real possibilities. Either the Albtraum would cut their losses and stop inviting in this unstoppable champion, which would definitely cause a great loss of face, loss of karma, and whatever else. If Val was also losing too often against others, say losing 1 in 4 times, their power and even the size of their realm would gradually diminish, and pretty soon they wouldn't even be a demigod, just an annoying forest spirit. Maybe not even that, if Asmodeus decided to punish them. Or the Albtraum would invite him in again, overcome by their own pride, and continue trying to defeat him. But after some amount of failures, after too many dozens of frustrated challenges, Al would eventually, inevitably, break their own rules. They would create a challenge that was just too powerful, or twist a rule in too blatant a way, a cheat which could not be justified by the cosmic logic under which the Nightmare Realm operates, and in doing so, would destroy this true champion. So, in our example, Al eventually just kills Swayne in a manner which was ultimately unfair, whatever that means. Swayne would die for real, but his soul may well slip out of the grasp of Asmodeus, as the Albtraum's realm failed. Al's power comes from their rules, the ancient gods-bound power of them, and careful adherence to them, however questionable it may seem from our outside mortal view, is what preserves and grows the green flame gifted to them by Asmodeus. So by clearly, truly violating those rules, the Albtraum would have doomed themselves to a fate worse than death, banished to some dark place amidst the astral sea, or possibly the hells of their former master. The forest once known as the Dark Place would crumble to dust, collapsing in on itself, creating a massive crater which would probably be mostly filled by the frigid, dark, inrushing sea, which would in turn flood many tunnels in the nearby regions of the Underdark Shallows. The ruination which was left would be anything but safe, but probably a rich place to scavenge from both above and below, scrounging for traces of the godly power that once resided there. My supporters on Patreon get extras videos about a week early so that I can answer a bunch of their questions in the final videos using completely arbitrary voices. Like these. Double Lucky asked, "What advice would you give to DMs who want to create an adventure that feels something like the last 12 episodes? What would you do to try to minimize frustration, maximize engagement, and such?" There was a lot that was messy and imperfect about this whole thing. Hopefully that's clear from the extras, including the failed experiments in adding player agency to the Lich's memories. My efforts to give them slightly directed choices of which ways to run through the countryside were pretty sloppy, and we ended up with a lot of slow talking and debating and exposition, mostly Rygax position. I just try things and do my best, and I personally tend to just keep dropping plot hooks and then follow up on whichever ones the PCs go for. Giving them choice over their overall direction definitely helps with frustration, but there's no magic formula. You have to find your own style, experiment, and be okay with the fact that sometimes you'll screw up. I guess the one thing I can say for a trapped on the run situation like this would be to set up and foreshadow some way of getting them out of the situation early without feeling like a huge Deus Ex, in case you reach a point when the players do not seem to be having fun anymore. In this case, I had some leeway in that I could just let them find an easier natural portal. Patrick Rooney asked, "Hey, which of the 2 Deathfin monitors would win in a duel? Also, could either of them defeat their nightmare duplicates?" Either one of them would stomp their nightmare duplicate, except for the fact that the Albtraum's version of multiform is too overpowered. Based on that alone, the real Zukuno might lose. But it's worth noting, these duplicates, because they weren't true Deathfins, didn't get their hit point multiplier. Also, as noted regarding the generic nightmare gear, the real ones should have as good or better magical equipment, but much better optimized. So real Zukuno is definitely tough enough, and probably wise enough, to escape after one round of 5-on-1, or 5 on however many Zed gets from real multiform, and potentially, if he was still close enough to observe the end of that ability, to come back and kick Nightmare Zukuno's fake ass. In a duel against each other, that's a tougher call. Vazilai's a badass, but it's hard to overcome all that Swiftblade BS. Joshua Arnott asked, if Zukuno's scroll basically just helped him become a Swiftblade, are Deathfin abilities of that sort, ones which emulate official printed character options, are those things you would normally ban? Or could a player become a Swiftblade too? No, while a Deathfin scroll can be an excuse for a homebrew freak power, like Vazilai's 50-foot offensive reach, just as often it's a backstory or in-universe justification for something that rules already exist for. Being a Deathfin monitor with access to the scroll, known as Hyasaz and Patience, is not a requirement to become a Swiftblade. Swiftblade is just a prestige class, which is so powerful that nobody bats an eye at, that's what his Deathfin scroll does? Though, fun fact, there could be a scroll at one of the other monasteries that does the same thing, or very similar, if one of their Deathfins independently discovered the technique. Though this one is so spellcasting based that it was far more likely to come from a Blood Mountain monitor. 9 asked, where did you get the idea for Vazilai's special technique? I mean, the two things to point to are probably characters, especially villains, with overpowered combat teleportation are always awesome, and there were some tactical feats in Complete Warrior, which let you do pretty cool things, but are generally not worth the amount of effort, the massive feat tax, or worse, being a monk, for an actual player character. Plus, you can retheme just about anything as really cool teleportation, if you try. Sentient Construct asked, what would have happened if the party had managed to take a nightmare duplicate out of the Outtram's realm? Would the clone dissipate, turn hostile, or extend Al's reach to locations where the copy is? Or what? If you pulled out something fully created like a zombie, or conjured like the ice sharks, it would just dissipate. If you managed to pull out a demon, which can't leave Al's realm on their own, that might actually let it loose upon the world, which Egon would consider a bad thing. But if you were tricked into bringing out a proper nightmare duplicate, something with a soul, well, that would certainly not let Al reshape other parts of the world the way they can in their own realm, which is basically a part of the Hells. But that being would presumably be able to continue on in the world, and it would definitely still have some connection to the Albtraum. Xylem asked, Juan, what is a soul in your setting? If it doesn't necessarily contain the memories of an individual, then what does it contain? 2, I thought vampires don't have souls. At least, that's what Swayne said in the Saga of Balvan. Would Albtraum even be interested in inviting him if there's no soul to gain? To clarify, I did not mean that souls lose all their memories after you die. I just meant that there's some uncertainty about what being in the heavens or the hells is like. Do you just wake up as you, exactly like being alive? Does your form there have anything resembling your skills or abilities from life? That would be quite an assumption. But I was less trying to imply major philosophical soul crap than to describe that when the Albtraum pulls out a soul to use, the process begins with kind of sanding off all the edges, and just using the core of that soul. That nightmare duplicate Vazilai is a soul with Vazilai's body and memories built around it, and they can't really remember who they used to be or anything about their previous life. They just remember being Vazilai. Yet it does matter what kind of personality, abilities, mindset, etc. the soul previously had, because if they don't match up with the individual Al's trying to copy, it's like putting a glove on a hand that is the wrong size or has a different number of fingers. 2. Swayne believes that vampires don't have souls, as do many others, and there's some pretty good evidence of that. They are undead, after all. But if Swayne died the day he was turned, that soul went somewhere. The real question is, how much connection is there between the ancient undead monarch and the soul of the teenage boy who died so long ago? Could Al get his original soul by defeating his current self? And if there's a huge difference in information between that young mortal's soul and the current Vampire King's mind, what does that mean? Does anything happen to that difference in information? All fascinating philosophical questions that I am definitely not answering. William Bailey asked, if any of the party were to die in this realm, would their souls have been trapped in this horrific pocket dimension forever? And if so, how does the Albtraum owning your soul affect resurrection spells? That was the big threat, though. As Thanos would say, no resurrections this time. If one of them died, their soul might remain Al's to toy with, or they might end up paid forward to Asmodeus. There's at least one party member which the Lord of Hell would want for his own. Leocrow asked, if Al broke one of their deals, ending them and resulting in the decay of their realm, with the sea flooding in, would that reverberate onto the Fadelands and the Feywild? Would the area corresponding to this new gulf eventually sink into the Fadelands ocean and whatever passes for one in the Feywild? Speaking of which, what is that green stuff where the ocean is on the fairy hippie crap map of the Feywild? If it's ocean in the other planes, it's still ocean in the Fey. That was just a combination of being facetious with the labels and intentionally recoloring everything to be weird and different, just to make the different planes stand out more on that graphic. But yes, the hypothetical Al's realm collapsing into a crater would have to have geographical repercussions, though it would probably take a long time. Over the course of several centuries, though, you would expect to see a lot of sinkholes and escalating to earthquakes until the shape of that part of the Fadelands matched up with the Shadowfell. Maybe the same sort of thing in the Feywild, but then again, it could equally happen there by the ground subtly becoming mineable to greater and greater depths until it matched, followed by a meteor strike. You never know. It works both ways, too, so after the initial collapse, some forces should go a little ways toward filling up the crater in the Shadowfell. Now that they've escaped the Shadowfell, we're getting close to the end, for now, of this series. I'm still figuring out if I'm doing 2 more episodes or maybe 3 shorter ones, but not to fear. After that I'll be moving over to a new party in the same world with the same players and the working title TDDC 2 as they explore different areas of the setting and find whole new kinds of trouble. For now, though, if you want to learn more about monitors, I released that Illud monitor story I had been working on, The Squirming Blood, for my Lore Master patrons. Compared to the last short story, A Few Minutes in the Shadowfell, it's a good chunk longer, which hopefully gives it a bit more world building and character, in addition to some crazy fighting. Content warning blood, obviously. Also, I've posted the character sheets for Zukuno and Vazilai, or at least Albtraum's versions of them, on the Patreon because people asked, though they are more or less as is, low on explanations, probably full of errors, but that's what my serious enemy stat blocks look like, as opposed to throwaway fights which look like this. I can't thank my Patreon patrons enough for generously keeping this channel running, with an extra thankful thanks to
Aether Mordu, Alberio, Aurelius, Aust, Bedemir, Critical Hit 20, Bessie, Carnlin, Dimin, Earl of Sanguine, Fey Crossroads, Fireborn, General M.O., Fright Knight, Gorefiend, Hakoon, 9, John, Call to John, Lieutenant Red, Nonito, Lord Abon, Malison Desh, Eccardio Thalion, MG3D, Norgrin, OI1, Oldenman, Overlord Thor, Pedrig of Rooney, Pontus, Prism Cat, Ramar Ulfist, Repmark, Stan the Man, Skyter 97, Starfall, Cygax, Tamu and June, Toshiro 7, Valis, Volkfang, W.A. Soul, Warsaw, Woodley, Zodrishan, and Zombie, the members of the organization. Get to the chopper.